The torches guttered as the doors of the great halls swung open and 300 wolves turned to watch the procession file in. And the last seat, Lord Cassian Vel announced, his voice pitched to carry, is for my youngest, the one who could not be placed anywhere else. A low ripple of amusement passed through the gathered court, the kind of laughter that costs nothing and means everything. He walked her to the long oak table set apart from the others, the one draped in grey linen instead of white, the one closest to the servants' door. 14 empty chairs, one occupied. The rejected mate's table. Lyra Vel did not stumble. She had learned, at 9, not to give her father the satisfaction of a misstep. She sat where he pointed. She folded her hands in her lap. She looked straight ahead at the black stone dais where the Alpha King had been sitting, motionless for the entire hour of the bonding feast. The other tables were set for celebration. 46 brides and their families arranged by rank, every chair carved with the sigil of a pack that mattered. Silver platters of roasted venison, sweet wine in goblets the color of crushed garnet, candles tall enough to throw light to the vaulted ceiling, where banners hung embroidered with 2 centuries of conquered names. The rejected mate's table had 1 cold trencher and a pewter cup of water. It was not meant to be eaten from. It was meant to be seen. A custom of our great northern houses, her father had explained to his 4th wife that morning, straightening the cuff of his ceremonial coat, is to bring the unclaimed. It reminds the chosen of their fortune. He had not looked at Lyra when he said it. He rarely did. Indifference, she had learned before she learned to read, is sharper than any blade a father can raise. She sat alone. She did not look at her sisters, whose gowns had been stitched for a month by women who were not allowed to eat in the same room as their work. She did not look at the courtiers who turned in their seats to stare. She looked at the king. Cael Draven Morthane, Alpha of the Iron Throne, had not moved since the procession began. He was enormous, a shape cut from shadow against the banner of his house, his forearms bare and corded with muscle, older than most of the kingdoms that had sworn to him. His hair was black and long, tied back with a leather cord. His eyes were gold, the cold, flat gold of hammered coin. A scar split his lower lip and disappeared into his beard. He wore no ornament but the iron circlet on his brow, and he held a cup of wine he had not tasted. He was 217 years old. He had not smiled in any of them that anyone living could remember. His gaze traveled the hall the way a wolf's does when it is neither hunting nor tired. It swept the long tables, the bride-price daughters, the fathers counting their hands full of alliance. It moved without interest, without pause, until it reached the grey linen table at the back of the hall, and stopped. Something inside Cael Draven's chest, something that had not stirred in a very long time, lifted its head. He set the cup down. The sound of pewter on stone was small, but in the sudden hush it carried. The servant paused mid-step. Lady Morgaine, his adviser, thin-lipped and silver-ringed at his left hand, turned her face toward him with the slow care of someone who had just heard a wall crack. "Your Grace." He did not answer her. He stood. The hall understood, before it understood anything else, that the feast was over. Now, to understand what came next, you must understand what had been taken from him. 2 centuries and 17 years ago, a woman named Isolde of the Fern had stood in a different hall and cursed him in a voice so soft the torches did not flicker. She had loved him. He had not loved her. He had been 23 and arrogant and certain, as alphas often are, that kindness was a form of weakness he could afford to refuse. He had laughed when she brought him bread she had baked with her own hands. He had given the bread to his hounds. She did not scream, she did not throw the curse like a stone. She pressed her palm against his chest, over the young strong heart of him, and she said, "Then you will feel nothing kind for as long as you live. First warmth, then taste, then truly no. Then color, then feeling itself, and your wolf will sleep until the day a hand offers you what mine offered and you do not laugh." She walked out into the snow. She was never seen again. By his 30th year, he could no longer feel the sun on his skin. By his 50th, wine tasted like river water. By his 100th, the world had drained to shades of grey and iron, and the green of summer looked no different from the white of winter. By his 150th, he could no longer remember what joy had felt like as a boy. He had not forgotten the memories. He had forgotten the sensation inside the memories. The shape of them remained hollow as a dropped chestnut shell, and his wolf, the great beast that had rung beside him since his first shift at 13, had gone quiet. Not absent, quiet, curled in some deep chamber of him that frost had formed across and sealed shut. Cale Draven had not heard the voice of his own wolf in a century and a half. He conquered anyway. He built anyway. He ruled anyway. A king without warmth is still a king. A king who does not love, does not hesitate. His enemies called him the Winter Grave. His own men called him sire and stepped aside when he passed, because anything he touched for too long left frost on the wood. He had stopped attending feasts 50 years ago. He had attended this one only because Lady Morgaine had insisted the kingdom needed a Luna, and the Pax needed the pageant of him looking. He had looked. He had seen nothing. Until the grey linen table. At the rejected mates' table, Lyra Vell did not register that the king had risen. She had trained herself not to look up when the room changed, because when the room changed, it was usually because someone had decided to make a joke of her. She kept her eyes on the tarnished pewter cup in front of her, on the wedge of stale bread set beside it, the bread that had been placed there not for eating but for mockery. She was not a noble woman, not really. Her mother had been a loom-keeper from the border country, a woman who carded wool and raised geese, and died of a fever when Lyra was 4. Lord Cassian had fathered her in a week he no longer remembered. He had claimed her only because a priest had insisted, and he had raised her in the kitchens of his hold, where she had learned to knead bread, gutfish, and keep her voice low. At 17, she had been brought into the main house because her father's new wife wanted a spare hand for the upcoming bonding season. At 19, she was here, at the back of the Iron Hall, dressed in a gown that had been one of her sister Oriane's 3 winters ago, let out twice at the seams, rehemmed by her own fingers the night before. She felt the silence of the hall before she understood it. A quality of hush like the moment before a bell rings. She looked up. The Alpha King was walking down the length of the hall. He did not walk fast. He walked the way a storm walks when it has decided which valley it will fill. His boots struck the flagstones one after another, and every wolf in the room turned on the bench to track him, and not one of them spoke. He did not look at Lady Morgaine, who hissed his title twice. He did not look at her father, who had half risen with a practiced smile already dying on his mouth. He did not look at the 46 brides in their white silks. He looked at her. When he stopped in front of her table, she had to tilt her chin up to find his face. He was close enough that she could see the scar on his lip, the fine lines at the corners of eyes that had watched kingdoms rise and fall, the faint tremor in the enormous hand that rested on the back of a chair that was not his. "Is this seat yours?" he asked. His voice was low and rough, like something rusted from long disuse. "It is the one I was given. That is not what I asked." She considered him. She thought of all the clever things she could say and did not say them. She said the true thing. "No, it is not mine. I do not want it." He nodded once, slowly, as though she had given him a piece of information more valuable than any he had received in 50 years. Then he turned his head toward the great hearth at the far end of the hall, and he lifted one hand, and he did a thing no one in the Iron Court had ever seen the king do in living memory. He spoke to the fire. "Burn it." For a moment, no one understood. Then the hearth flames, banked low and sullen all evening, leapt. They climbed. They reached out along the stone floor in a line as thin and deliberate as ink from a pen, and they found the leg of the rejected mates' table, and they bloomed. The grey linen caught, the pewter cup warped, the stale bread charred to a small black heart. Lyra did not flinch. She had watched her father burn her mother's loom the week after the funeral, because he said it took up space. She had learned then how to stand still while fire did its work. The king extended his hand to her. "Move." She stood. She stepped away from the burning table. And then, to the astonishment of every wolf in the Iron Hall, the fire kept walking. It traveled from the grey linen table to the next one and the next and the next. Not a blaze. A deliberate surgical line of flame that consumed each chair at each table along the eastern aisle, the ones set for the fathers who had brought daughters they did not love, the ones set for the cousins who had laughed loudest when Lyra was seated alone. The chairs burned. The tables did not. The food did not. The banners did not. Only the chairs. 47 empty places by the time the flames lay down again and slept. Lady Morgaine reached the king's side. Her hand hovered at his sleeve, but did not touch. "Your Grace, this is not done." "It is now," he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at her. He was looking at Lyra, and something in his chest, something that had been ice for longer than anyone in this room had been alive, was beginning, very slowly, to crack. He held his hand out a second time. She put hers into it. His fingers closed around hers, and he inhaled sharply the way a drowning man inhales when he breaches the surface, and she felt the great tremor that ran through him from shoulder to knee. She did not understand it. She only understood that this man, this carved granite king who had burned the furniture of an entire hall because a girl had been seated at the wrong table, was shaking because she had touched him. He led her out of the iron hall. The doors opened without anyone touching them. The night poured in, smelling of pine smoke and river stone and wet iron. Lyra did not look back. Her father was not worth a last look. The corridor to the east tower was longer than she remembered from the procession. Her feet hurt. She had worn her sister's old slippers. The king walked more slowly than a man of his size should have, she realized, matching his stride to hers. He did not speak until they had passed 2 guard stations and climbed the narrow stair to a landing overlooking the inner courtyard. Then he stopped. He released her hand with the careful slowness of someone setting down a thing that might shatter. "You did not thank me," he said. "For burning chairs?" For the choice, she looked up at him. His face in the torchlight was not the face of the king in the hall. It was tired. It was older than his years and younger than his legend, both at once. I was not sure yet whether it was a choice or a capture. He absorbed that. He nodded. "Fair. Why did you do it?" He was a long time answering. When he did not answer the question she had asked. "For 150 years, he said, I have not heard my wolf speak. Tonight, when you looked up at me from that table, he opened his eyes. I did not know he was still there. She did not know what to say. She said nothing. Silence, she had learned, was a country she could afford. He turned to a low door set in the landing wall and pushed it open with his shoulder. A room lay beyond, small, warm. A fire laid ready in the grate. A narrow bed, a window open to the stars. "This is not the Luna's chambers," he said. "I will not put you in those until you choose them. This room is yours. Lock the door. I will not come through it. And tomorrow you will be spoken against. My advisor will argue. Your father will arrive with a contract of alliance he drew up on the way back to his horse. You will have to decide, again, whether you wish to stay. And again the day after. I will not pretend otherwise." She looked into the small, warm room. She looked at him. "You did not ask my name," she said. "I know your name." "How?" "My wolf knew it before you sat down." She went inside. She did not lock the door that night. She did not need to. She lay on the narrow bed in her sister's old slippers and listened to the sound of him walking away down the stone corridor, and for the first time since she was 9 she slept a full night through without waking. Lady Morgaine came for her at dawn. The advisor was not a cruel woman in the way Lyra's father was cruel. She was a cruel woman in the way Winter is cruel, which is to say impersonal. She sat across from Lyra in a small receiving room, a cup of hot cider between them that neither touched, and she folded her silver-ringed fingers and explained, in the flat voice of a clerk reading a tax roll, exactly what Lyra was not. She was not a Luna. She was not the daughter of an allied house. She was not a shifter as far as anyone could tell, and a king without an heir shaped by a proven bloodline was a king whose kingdom died with him. She was a loon-keeper's bastard. She was a footnote. "I do not dislike you," Lady Morgaine said, and this was the first true thing she said all morning. "I watched him last night. I've served him for 41 years. I have never seen him reach for a cup and miss it because his hand was shaking. If you leave, he will freeze again. I know that. I am telling you to leave anyway. Why? Because a king who melts is a king who breaks, and a king who breaks takes a kingdom with him." She looked down at her rings. For one strange moment she touched the smallest one, a plain band of tarnished silver with no stone in it, the kind of ring a servant's daughter might wear. I had a sister once, she said. She married above her station. It did not end the way the stories say. Lyra watched her. She did not look in that moment like an advisor. She looked like a woman who had carried a grief for so long it had calcified into policy. Then Lady Morgan lifted her chin. The moment closed. You will be offered a purse. You will take it. You will go back to your loom-keeping country, and you will live a quiet life. That is my offer. And if I refuse, then I will not be the one who harms you. But I will not be the one who protects you either. Lyra stood up. She did not take the cider. Tell the king, she said, that I am not for sale, and I am not the saving. She walked out. Her father arrived at noon as the king had said he would. Lord Cassian Vell was not admitted to the high hall. He was made to wait in the lower courtyard with the petitioners and the farmers, and when Lyra came down, alone, on her own feet in a plain wool gown she had asked a serving woman for that morning, he did not recognize her for a full count of 3. When he did, his face did the thing faces do when a man recalibrates a daughter from embarrassment into asset. She watched the calculation happen. She had seen it before, performed on her sisters. It was the first time in her life it had been performed on her, and she found, to her mild surprise, that it did not move her. Lyra, he opened his arms. My girl, I have come to. There has been a misunderstanding. The table last night was the table you chose for me. It was a tradition, a very old, very misunderstood. You have always been too clever to take such things personally, my darling. I am not your darling. He paused. He tried a different door. Your sister Oriane has been weeping all morning. She fears for you. She wishes me to convey her love. Oriane has not said my name in 4 years. Lyra. He lowered his voice. He stepped closer. She smelled for an instant the wet newspaper and pipe tobacco scent of his ceremonial coat, and she remembered being 6 and pressing her face against that coat at her mother's burial, and being pushed away because she was staining the wool. The king has shown you favor. That is good for the house. Let us speak of how the house might, in turn, support the king. I have prepared a small document. Burn it. He blinked. She turned and looked back up at the balcony of the inner keep. Cale Draven stood there. He had been standing there the whole time. He had not interfered. He had only watched so that she would know he trusted her to do this herself. Burn it, she said again quietly. Or take it home and file it with the rest of your misunderstandings. I do not care which. I am not a bridge to his throne. I am not a tool you are reclaiming. I am the spare, father. You taught me that yourself. Spares do not go back into the drawer, you ungrateful. Goodbye. She turned and walked back up the stairs. Behind her, she heard him call her name twice, then her title once, a title he had never used when it might have cost him anything. She did not turn. On the landing, the king did not touch her. He did not speak. He only stepped aside so that she could pass, and as she passed him, she saw that his hand, resting on the stone balustrade, had left behind no frost. The curse did not break all at once. Curses rarely do. It broke in pieces, and each piece was a small, specific thing. The second week, he tasted bread. He had lifted a piece of breakfast out of the habit of eating, and he had stopped, his jaw very still, and she had watched the muscles in his throat work as he swallowed. He set the piece down carefully. It is, he said, and then he could not finish the sentence. He tried again. There is salt in it. Yes, she said. Marin put salt in it. I did not know. The 4th week he saw the color of her hair. They were walking in the courtyard, and a shaft of autumn sun came through the arch, and he stopped mid-stride and stared at her, and she thought he had taken ill. Then he said, It is not brown. What is not? Your hair. It is. He was searching for a word he had not needed in 100 years. Red, at the ends. Where the sun is on it, it has always been red at the ends. I could not see it, he said. I am seeing it. He lifted one of the fallen leaves from the flagstone and held it up to the light beside her hair, and she watched his face do a thing it had not been asked to do in 2 centuries, which was to register wonder. The 6th week, he slept. Not long. Not well. but he slept curled on the bench of her small, warm room because she had refused still to move to the Luna's chambers, and when he woke he wept once, a single dry exhalation, and he did not know why. The 7th week, his wolf spoke. She was not there when it happened. He came to her in the evening after a council meeting that had run long, and he sat down across from her at the small table where she took her supper, and he put his hands flat on the wood, and he said, "He told me your name." "Who? Who?" "My wolf. He told me your name, Lyra. He said it the way a man says water after a long march. He said it, and then he said, 'She is ours,' and he said, 'We will not survive her going.'" She set her cup down. She reached across the table and laid her hand over his, and she felt, under her palm, the fine tremor of a man who had been alone in his own body for longer than the oldest stone in the fortress. "Then I will not go," she said. And the last of the frost, the deep old frost that lived in the chambers of him where the curse had set down its roots, let go. Lord Cassian Bell's letter arrived in the first week of spring. It was 3 pages long. It was written in a hand that trembled in places, which surprised her, because her father was not a man who let his hands tremble on paper. He wrote of his grief. He wrote of his pride. He wrote of the small failures of fatherhood he had, perhaps, in the rush of his life, overlooked. He wrote of the daughter whose strength he had not recognized until she had refused him in a courtyard in front of his men. He asked to be received. He did not ask for money. He asked for a visit. He asked toward the end for forgiveness. Lyra read the letter twice. She set it down on the breakfast table. Cale, across from her, watched her face with the quiet attention of a man who would break the world if he asked him to, and would not break a leaf if she did not. "What will you do?" he asked. She thought about the cellar at 9. She thought about the loom he had burned. She thought about the chair at the grey linen table. She thought about Lady Morgaine's sister, whoever she had been, and about the plain silver ring, and about how cruelty comes in many currencies, and about how a life well lived was the one answer none of them could take from her. "I will write back," she said. "Only that? I will tell him that the spare is doing quite well. I will tell him I wish him neither harm nor visits. I will tell him the gate will be open to him the day he sends bread instead of apologies, and that I do not expect that day. And I will send the letter with a loaf from our kitchens because my mother kept geese and baked bread, and I would like him to remember that she existed." Cale smiled. It was still a rare thing, that smile. He had practiced it in private the way a man practices a language he was not taught as a child. But it reached his eyes now, and his eyes, she had come to learn, were not the flat gold of hammered coin at all. They were the gold of honey, held up to a window. They were married on the first warm day of the year. She wore a walled gown dyed the color of autumn leaves because she did not like silk. He wore no circlet because he had taken it off in a great hall 7 months before and had not put it back on. He set it down instead on the stone floor at her feet during the vows. And he knelt, and a king of 2 centuries and 17 years pressed his forehead against the back of her hand and said the old words in a voice that shook. Behind them in the courtyard, the kitchen garden was beginning its first green. Marin had planted peas along the south wall. A hound had dug up the carrots and been forgiven. On the rejected mates' table, which Lyra had asked to be kept, not burned, Marin had set a long loaf of bread, warm from the ovens, and a pitcher of cider, and a single chipped pewter cup turned upright, full. Above the fortress, in the high clear air of early spring, a wolf began to howl. Then another, until the whole black forest behind Thornhold was answering, and the sound carried down into the courtyard, and Cale lifted his head from his wife's hand and listened. She watched his face. She watched the man inside the king listen to his own wolf sing for the first time in 150 years, not in mourning, not in warning, but in the old full joy of a creature that has found the thing it was looking for. He turned his face into a palm. He closed his eyes. He did not speak. He did not need to. In the kitchen garden, a bee landed on the first open rose. So, where are you listening from tonight? Drop it in the comments and tell me which moment hit you hardest. Was it the chairs burning, or the bread at the end, or the sound of his wolf finally speaking? If the story kept you company a little longer than you expected, hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next tale. I will see you in the next one. And then